He wore that shirt to meet her parents, and Dad did something nobody expected him to do. The boy showed up to Christmas dinner wearing a shirt that said, "It's not gonna suck itself," to meet his girlfriend's parents. For the first time. At Christmas. And somehow, what followed is one of the most quietly powerful parenting moments you will ever hear about on this channel. Picture it. It is the 23rd of December. A 19-year-old kid walks up to the front door, rings the bell, Dad answers, and the first thing Dad sees after the jacket comes off is that sentence. Printed on a shirt. In his house. In front of his wife. In front of his daughter. And this man, this 57-year-old long-haul truck driver who has absolutely seen some things in his lifetime, did not raise his voice. He did not slam the door. He did not call anyone out in front of the family. He just quietly asked the kid if he had any money. Now think about what that composure actually required. This is a man who has spent decades behind the wheel of a truck, someone who has navigated difficult, high-pressure situations across thousands of miles of road. He knows what it means to stay calm when something catches you completely off guard. And in that doorway, with his daughter somewhere in the background and his wife within earshot and Christmas decorations framing the whole surreal scene, he chose calm. He chose private. He chose effective over emotional. That question alone should tell you everything about who this father is. Because most people in that moment are reacting. Most people are embarrassed, or furious, or they are making it a whole thing right there in the doorway. Most people let the shock take over and say something they cannot take back, in front of everyone, turning a correctable situation into a full-blown memory that sits at the table for years. But not this guy. He had already made a decision. He pulled out two 20s from his own wallet, walked the kid back outside, pointed him toward the Walmart 3 miles down the road, and told him to come back in a more respectful shirt. The whole exchange happened privately, just the two of them, no audience, no drama, no scene. He did not make the kid feel like a criminal. He made him feel like someone who had made a mistake and had a clear, immediate way to fix it. There is an enormous difference between those two things, and this father understood that intuitively. 15 minutes later, the kid came back wearing a nice polo. They had a lovely dinner. Nobody mentioned it again that night. The whole situation was handled, closed, and moved forward without a single person at that table being humiliated publicly. Think about what that dinner must have felt like. The food on the table, the conversation finding its footing, the daughter relieved without quite knowing why, the mother gracious, the father sitting across from this young man and simply letting him exist without making him pay for his mistake over and over again throughout the meal. That restraint, that generosity, is not easy. It is practiced. If that does not impress you, I do not know what will. Now here is where it gets a little complicated. The next day, the daughter came to her parents and told them that what Dad did had humiliated her boyfriend. And this is the part that is worth sitting with for a moment, because she was not entirely wrong to feel something. She cares about this guy. She probably spent time before that dinner being excited and nervous about how it would go. She imagined the introductions, the small talk, the first impression her family would make and the one he would make. She did not see what happened at the door, she only heard about it afterward, and the word she chose was humiliated. That word landed hard enough that even Mom said Dad could have handled it differently. So suddenly a moment that felt like quiet, competent parenting was being called into question, and Dad did what genuinely thoughtful people do. He went to Reddit and asked. What came out of the comments section actually changed how he understood the whole situation. He went back to his daughter the next morning and asked her a very specific question. He asked what exactly the boyfriend had told her. And this is where the story shifts, because it turns out the boyfriend had not told his girlfriend what the shirt actually said. He told her what Dad said and what Dad did, accurately and fairly, but he left out the specific phrase on the shirt. He did not use the word humiliated either. That word came from the daughter, based on her own interpretation of how it must have felt for him. And that distinction matters enormously, because it means the boyfriend was not out there painting dad as the villain. He was honest about what happened. He just did not volunteer the embarrassing detail, which honestly tracks for a 19-year-old who knows he messed up badly and is not trying to make himself look worse by spelling out exactly what the shirt said to the girl he is trying to impress. So dad sat with that. He thought about what it meant that the boyfriend had been fair and honest even when he could have shifted blame. He thought about what it meant that his daughter had filled in the gaps with her own emotional interpretation. And then the daughter made a phone call that I want everyone to hear about, because this young woman absolutely rose to the occasion. She called her boyfriend and asked him directly why he had not told her what the shirt said when they spoke. His answer was simple. Because it was embarrassing. She then asked him why he wore it in the first place. And that is when the whole story cracked open, because it turns out the shirt was a gift from his older brother, who is 21, and who had dared him to wear it. Called him a chicken when he refused. Classic older sibling nonsense that somehow, through a chain of terrible decisions and wounded pride, resulted in this kid walking into his girlfriend's family home on December 23rd wearing that shirt to Christmas dinner. Here is where I have to pause. Because the older brother gave him that shirt. As a dare. And the younger kid actually put it on. And drove to his girlfriend's house. For Christmas dinner. I am not even mad, I am just in absolute awe of the confidence it takes to make that specific series of choices. Anyway. The daughter did not let him off the hook. She told him clearly that none of what happened was cool, that she really liked him, but that there were steps that needed to be taken if they were going to move forward. Step 1, he had to explain the whole situation to his parents. Step 2, he had to show up in person, at the family home, with the money for the shirt and what she called, and I am quoting directly here, a whole ass kissing session that included the explanation of the dare. She told him that if he handled it well, they could talk about what moving forward looked like. She was not cruel about it. She was not cold. But she was clear, and clarity in that moment was exactly what love required. And then after that phone call, she sat with her parents and said something that stopped everyone cold. She said she had forgotten her worth. She said that her dad had never, in all her life, gone out of his way to embarrass her mom, and had never let anyone be disrespectful to her mom either. And she said she was not going to settle for less than that standard in her own relationship. That sentence alone is the entire reason this story exists. Because this girl grew up watching her parents treat each other with dignity. She watched her dad defend her mom quietly and without making it a performance. She watched disagreements get handled privately and respectfully. She watched what it looked like when someone loved you enough to correct a situation without turning it into a spectacle. And she internalized all of it so deeply, over so many years, that the moment something did not measure up to that standard, she named it clearly and set a condition around it. She did not spiral. She did not rage. She did not excuse it out of fear of being alone. She just said, "Here is the bar, here is how you clear it, and I will be watching what you do next." That is not an accident. That is what happens when you parent with consistency and intention over 19 years. Now the update that made everyone lose their minds. Dad got a phone call from the boyfriend's parents. And not just any phone call. These parents were mortified. They were apologetic. And here is the part that made this whole saga legendary. His parents are on Reddit. They had found the post. They commented on it in support of how dad handled things. And when the boyfriend went home to talk to his parents as part of his girlfriend's conditions, his mom picked up her phone, opened Reddit, and asked, in terms I will not repeat verbatim but which were extremely direct, whether this post was about their son. According to his dad, as the son started reading the first half of the first paragraph, he died a little inside. And honestly? Good. That is exactly what should happen when you show up to someone's home wearing a shirt like that. That is the universe doing its job efficiently. But here is what separates this story from every other awkward meet the parents disaster you have ever heard. These parents did not get defensive. They did not make excuses. They did not say boys will be boys or try to minimize what happened. They said clearly that they had not raised their sons to show this level of disrespect to anyone, let alone to a girlfriend. And they asked to come to dinner. That is accountability showing up in real time, from an entire family, and it is genuinely rare. The dinner that followed was by every account a success. The boyfriend arrived with red roses for the girlfriend and yellow roses for mom. He delivered what Dad described as a very sincere apology, one that was specific and unhurried, along with a card containing the full $40, even though he had already handed over the change and the receipt on the original night. He chose to complete the gesture anyway, which is the kind of detail that tells you a person is genuinely trying rather than just going through the motions. Dad cooked butter chicken with basmati rice. Nobody at the table had eaten curry before, and everyone loved it. There is something quietly perfect about that, a family sitting down to food that is new to all of them, something unfamiliar made together, everyone a little vulnerable in the best possible way. And near the end of the evening, the daughter looked around the table and said she thought she would keep him around a little longer. Which, coming from a girl who had just reminded herself of her own worth, is about the warmest endorsement a boyfriend can receive. And then there is the older brother situation, which deserves its own moment of appreciation. As punishment for engineering this whole disaster with the dare, his mom went into his room, removed every single shirt from his drawers and his closet, and replaced them with 8 very bright pink t-shirts. He is to wear them until he understands how damaging it is to exploit someone. His access to cash was also cut off until that lesson is learned. And apparently, in a twist nobody saw coming, his girlfriend likes the pink shirts and he has been getting compliments. So the universe has a sense of humor. Let me be direct about where I land on this. Dad did not humiliate anyone. He saw something disrespectful, he handled it privately, he funded the solution himself, and he gave a 19-year-old kid the most graceful exit imaginable. There was no yelling, no public shaming, no lasting damage to the relationship. He held up a mirror quietly and without fanfare, which is exactly how he said the lessons that stayed with him in his own life were delivered. He did not treat the kid like an enemy. He treated him like someone capable of better, which is one of the most underrated forms of respect one person can show another. And the daughter understood something that a lot of adults 3 times her age still have not figured out. She understood that how people treat the ones they love in private is the most accurate measure of who they are. She set a standard, communicated it clearly, gave him the steps to meet it, and watched what he did with the opportunity. That is emotional maturity operating at a level that most people are still working toward. The boyfriend, for his part, did everything right once the situation was named. He was honest with his girlfriend. He talked to his parents. He showed up with roses and a full apology and the money returned without being asked to return all of it. He did not make excuses or play victim. He just showed up and did the work. And that matters. That is not nothing. The older brother started the fire, but the younger one walked through it with his integrity intact. This whole story is what happens when people, across generations, choose accountability over ego. The father could have made a scene. The daughter could have defended her boyfriend blindly without asking questions. The boyfriend could have deflected and minimized. The parents could have gotten defensive. Instead, every single person in this story eventually chose honesty, repair, and forward motion. And that is why it ended with butter chicken and yellow roses and a family that came out closer than they started. She said my white friend was a colonizer for wearing my culture's clothes and I was done. She called him a colonizer for wearing clothes that the people of that culture actively celebrate seeing on visitors in the home country of the person defending him. Let that sit for a second, because the sheer confidence of that position is something I genuinely need to walk you through. So here is the setup. A woman in her mid-20s, Asian, part of a diverse group of friends, watches a video go around of one of their mutual friends, a white guy, who is traveling through Asia. He visits her home country. While there, he attends local events, wears local clothing, which she explains is comfortable, climate appropriate, and actively welcomed by the people of that culture. And she is not speaking theoretically here. She is saying her culture gets excited when outsiders want to wear and use their clothing. It makes them feel seen, celebrated, and appreciated. She grew up watching her family and her neighbors light up when a foreigner made the effort to engage genuinely with their traditions, not as a costume or a joke, but with actual curiosity and respect. That warmth is not incidental. It is a core part of how that community relates to the outside world. He would have had the blessing of literally everyone he met in that country, and the approval of every person in her community back home. So this is not a case of someone sneaking into another culture and taking something sacred without permission. This is a white man being welcomed into a community, wearing what he was invited to wear, posting about it genuinely and openly, and then getting absolutely torched in the comments by people who were not from that culture. By people who were, in their own words, outraged on her behalf. Without asking her. Without pausing for even a moment to consider that the person whose culture was allegedly being harmed might have a perspective worth hearing before the pile-on began. Now, to be fair, most of the friends who initially piled on actually calmed down and apologized once she clarified her culture's actual position. That is worth acknowledging, because it shows most of these people were reacting out of a reflexive instinct to protect rather than out of genuine malice. They heard the word Asia, they saw a white man in traditional clothing, and they responded to a pattern they recognized, even though the context was completely different. You could almost understand the impulse. These were people who had probably seen real instances of cultural disrespect play out online, people who had been trained by experience to react quickly and loudly, and they applied that reaction here before gathering the full picture. Most of them, when given that context, adjusted. That is what reasonable people do. But one person did not. One person kept going. She kept calling him a colonizer. She kept invoking white privilege. She kept asserting the right to tell him what he could and could not wear, regardless of what anyone from the actual culture said. And here is the part that makes this situation genuinely complicated, because this is not just someone being stubborn about a difference of opinion. She started telling a woman from that culture that her understanding of her own culture was naive. She told her that her community's positive view of outsiders engaging with their clothing was unrealistic. She dismissed it entirely, with a kind of casual certainty that was almost more insulting than the argument itself. Like the lived experience of someone from that country, surrounded by her own family and community, celebrating their traditions with real people in real spaces, was less valid than the framework that this one person had decided to apply from the outside, from a distance, based on theory rather than proximity. I really need you to sit with that. Because at some point this stopped being about protecting anyone from harm and started being something else entirely. There is a particular kind of arrogance that disguises itself as awareness, and this is what it looks like in practice. When you look at a person from a culture, hear them explain how their community feels about something, and then tell them they are wrong about their own culture, that is not advocacy. That is the exact opposite of what advocacy is supposed to look like. That is taking a tool that was designed to amplify marginalized voices and using it to speak over one. Loudly. Repeatedly. While insisting the whole time that you are the one doing the right thing. Our original poster brought up a genuinely important point during their conversation. She mentioned that her culture had its own history of experiencing appropriation, aggression, and disrespect from various groups throughout history. She raised it carefully and deliberately to show that she understands the concept on a deep and personal level, that she is not dismissing the idea that cultural harm is real, but that this specific situation did not meet that threshold by any reasonable measure. She was not being naive. She was being precise. And what did she get back? That it had no bearing. That it did not count. That her history of navigating these exact tensions, as someone who actually grew up inside that culture, watching her community respond to outsiders with either joy or discomfort depending on the situation, was not relevant to the conversation. which is a breathtaking thing to say to someone. And look, I want to be careful here because this is genuinely layered territory. The instinct to protect, especially for communities that have watched their own cultural elements be mocked, commercialized, and stripped of meaning over generations, is not a bad instinct on its own. It comes from a real place. It comes from real history. It comes from having seen what happens when that protection is absent and no one speaks up. And it often gets applied to situations where it absolutely belongs. But the application of that framework requires listening to the people most directly affected. It requires checking in rather than charging ahead. If the person from the culture says this is welcome, if the community says this is celebrated, then the protection is no longer protecting anyone. It is just overriding someone else's voice with your own and calling it care. Here's what gets me the most about this whole situation. The friend in question was not trying to cause harm. She genuinely believed she was doing something good. And that sincerity is part of what makes the situation so frustrating to watch unfold, because the confidence was completely untethered from the reality of what was happening in front of her. She was outraged on behalf of someone who was not asking to be outraged over. She built an entire moral case, called someone a colonizer, kept fighting past multiple corrections, dismissed the perspective of the actual culture involved, and kept going anyway. And when she finally sat down with our original poster in person, rather than hearing it as a conversation worth having, rather than treating it as an opportunity to learn something, she doubled down and suggested that everyone who did not share her view was being naive. That word, naive, is doing a lot of work there. Because what it really means is, I have decided my framework is more correct than your lived experience, and I am not going to update that belief just because you are actually from there and I am not. That is not solidarity. That is not allyship. That is just being unwilling to be wrong. So where does that leave the original poster in terms of what she should do? She asked whether she would be the one in the wrong for telling her friend bluntly to drop the subject. The answer is absolutely not. She has every right to say clearly and directly that the continued commentary is unwelcome, that it was never asked for, and that she finds the sustained hostility more offensive than anything her white friend did. Because at this point that is the honest truth. The friend has become the source of harm in this situation. Not the man wearing the clothes. Not the culture that welcomed him. The person who keeps insisting she knows better than all of them. And as for the friendship itself, the original poster mentioned she is not sure it will continue. I think she already knows what she thinks. When someone tells you that your understanding of your own culture is naive, that your people's perspective is unrealistic, and that their outrage on your behalf supersedes your actual feelings, that is not a friend who is looking out for you. That is a friend who has decided their own worldview is the measure of everything, including your life and your heritage. And you do not owe anyone a seat at your table for that. The moment this woman stopped listening to the person she claimed to be protecting, she stopped being an advocate and started being the problem. Full stop. You can care deeply about cultural respect and still be completely wrong about a specific situation. In fact, caring deeply makes it more important to listen carefully, not less. Because good intentions without listening are just noise dressed up as righteousness. She was not defending a culture. She was performing outrage at the expense of one. And the person with the most right to speak on this tried to tell her that, more than once, with patience and with context, and she waved it away. That is the last thing an ally should ever do. And it is reason enough to walk away. Drop a comment and tell me which story hit harder for you, the dad with the polo shirt plan or the friend who would not stop. And if you got something out of this one, a like and a subscribe means the world.